get ready for our panel discussion. I'm going to do some breathing exercises myself. That was a really beautifully done film. Really looking forward to speaking to our panel. And you'll see a few numbers here. Again, just a reminder that if you do feel like you would like to speak to a confidential advocate, you can see Community Solutions 24-hour hotline is below. And take a moment if you need to just walk around and just get ready for what I hope will be a really inspiring conversation with some incredible advocates in our community. I find that you'll see they're popping up on our screen. We're going to start our conversation in just a moment. We have Anna Smith, who's a co-producer of the Boys documentary, Mark Taylor, who we saw in the film, and he's CEO and founder of the Buddy House, Nathan Earl, who provides consulting all over really and has been a pioneer in the movement, bringing attention to violence against males and boys, and Miriam Wolf, who's a forensic specialist interviewer in San Mateo County. You'll see that the bios for all of our speakers, they have a really rich experience. We're going to pass over the bios today, but we'll include them in the chat so you can read more about our speakers. But I wanted to just do a deep dive into this film. And again, thank you everybody for being here. I wanted to start with you, Anna, because this documentary, it's beautifully done, really powerful documentary, and it shines light on a population that's really often overlooked, which is sexually exploited and trafficked boys and young males. Why did you decide to make this film?
It's a great question and such a lovely way to kick off this conversation. So good to be with everyone tonight. Thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us viewing this film. So deciding to do the film was really inspired out of the lack of literature, the lack of any type of medium that really spoke to survivors who identify as males. When we started filming, and I say we because it was myself, my partner, and a good friend of ours named Curtel, our small group came together and decided that there wasn't any films on this topic and something needed to be said, something needed to be done, and it needed to be spoken from the survivor's perspective, male survivor's perspective. At the time, I was running a nonprofit and serving male-identified survivors primarily. And when I was going out in the community to do education, to speak about this, to break down stigmas, and to also get referrals and let folks know that, hey, this is an agency that can provide services, I didn't have a lot that could help people understand and really get into the compassion seat where they would possibly make change in the way they provide services. And so that was why we decided to do the film, and we're so glad we did it.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Mark, thank you for sharing so much in the film. It was so powerful. I wanted to ask you, actually, can you share with us some common misconceptions around sexual exploitation of boys and men?
Sure. Thank you. Basically, it doesn't matter if you are macho, if you're small, you're skinny. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Hispanic, whatever your nationality may be. You have to kind of realize and understand that a person changes and the perception changes, but it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like. You could be a CEO of an organization, or you can just be a common, McDonald's employee that has been going through this particular situation and need help dealing with it.
Thank you for that. Nathan, what do you see that are most prominent models of sex trafficking of minor and young adult males? Do you see that as being different from what we see with girls?
I think there's the three common models. Equitas out of California initially published research on this. I fully agree, and it matches up with the programs that I've been involved with. There's a family model, or that family of origin, a family of choice, or the street family model, and then the survival sex model. I think those are experienced by young people across the gender spectrum. Where I think it pertains to boys is that boys are trafficked at younger ages with familial trafficking, and we know that boys are at the greatest risk of online exploitation, according to Interpol. and with that family model, there, families experiencing poverty or caregivers and family members that are substance dependent will coerce their boys into sexual exploitation through prostitution, through sex trafficking, online pornography, or child sexual abuse imagery to support the drug habit, or to support the family. With that street family model, we know that LGBTQI youth are disproportionately impacted. And even in 2022, such a high rate of those, high number of those youth are kicked out and abandoned by the parents to the streets. And on the streets, or even in, out of home care, such as a group home, they develop these new family bonds with this family of choice, if you will, that can be just as strong as the caregivers. And so I think though girls may experience these models, what makes it more sensitive to LGBTQI youth is that there are higher rates on the streets. And then once on the streets, in particular, transgender youth, they face discrimination by providers and by law enforcement. So it's just harder to either disclose or reach out for help. And then finally, on that, the survival sex, I think there's a lot less resources and for the boys to reach out to, but there's also higher rates of substance dependency, visits to the emergency room for substance dependency. And we know that that's a strong on-ramp. So I think, youth in general can experience these, but there are some risks at the societal and community level that just exacerbate the risks for boys, for males.
Thank you for that overview. I think that's really helpful to think about. And I'll come back to Mark also to talk a little bit more about that family connection there. But I wanted to ask Miriam, because in your role, you really interview survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation. And I'm curious to know what differences have you observed in terms of grooming and sexual exploitation of boys and young adult males? Or do you use a different approach when you're working with boys? Oh, I think you're on mute, Miriam. There we go.
I think after 2 years of Zoom and virtual experiences, I'd remember to take myself off mute. I do want to answer the question, but I also want to just applaud the maker of the film and all the people who participated in the film and shared their experiences. I was really moved when I saw this film and saw it again tonight. And I'm really humbled and honored to be here as part of the panel. I really appreciated the framing that Nathan just gave about the different groupings or subtypes of boys who do get exploited and some of the pathways that lead them there. And I don't want to repeat all of that, but I do see that in my role as an interviewer. And one of the ways that I see it is because the approach that we use, and this is true for girls and young women as well, but the idea of a good quality forensic interview is really to uncover what is the pathway for an individual who got into the life, and what were the barriers to coming forward, and what were the experiences that led to a boy, a young man being out on the street. And when we do the interviews, almost more important than getting details about sexual activities, which is something that we do in a more typical child sexual abuse interview for the purposes of charging and things like that. What we do in a trafficking interview is really understand the details, the background about how someone got into the life, and what kept them from being able to leave. What were the barriers? How a trafficker, a family member, or a trafficker out on the street maintained control over that person and met some of the needs, survival needs that a person had. In the question that you asked, there was a question about grooming, and one of the things that I think we've learned is grooming is the word grooming can have some positive connotations. It's what we do to ourselves to make ourselves look nice. It's what people do to train horses, but really replacing the word grooming now is the word manipulation, and so we're really trying to understand what it is that the trafficker was doing to have a hold on young men and keep them dependent and needing to stay in that life. And that's really what we do during an interview, is try and uncover that individual's story.
And I should have asked Miriam, because folks may not be that familiar with what forensic interviewing is. And so I should have given you an opportunity to kind of say, what is the purpose of a forensic interview and what role does that play?
Sure. A forensic interview, the word forensic means appropriate for a court of law. So a forensic interview comes at a time when a survivor is able and interested and safe to tell their story about how they got into the life, what happened while they were in the life, and to figure out, can the legal system respond to hold people accountable who manipulate boys and young men, as well as girls and women in this way.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that shift in language. It's something that I'll definitely be being more intentional about when I'm thinking about grooming versus manipulation. Anna, coming back to you, what are some reasons you discovered which causes boys and men to often be overlooked when we're talking about sexual exploitation?
Absolutely. The movement as a whole has been extremely female-centric. And, as a white cisgendered woman and one who identifies as a female survivor of sexual exploitation and trafficking, I feel like I can say some of this, and that is just not helpful to continue to perpetuate the narrative. And we're doing a better job, with screenings like this and more inclusive programming and education around what is it like to really include gender bias in your training. Like, we're doing a better job, and there is more literature and a growing group of literature around how to support survivors of male sex trafficking. However, as a movement, we are so female-centric and historically have been, like other movements, right? Domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, where when the image of a victim comes to mind, we're thinking of a little girl and likely also a little cisgendered girl, right? We're not thinking about LGBTQ plus, we're not thinking about male identified folks. We're certainly not thinking of folks of color. And so the purpose of this film was to do just a small part in trying to change the narrative around that. Also in the movement, we often think of males as perpetrators. When it comes to thinking about even females being perpetrators, that isn't necessarily discussed. It's also taboo. And so those are some of the barriers for adolescent boys, young boys, and also adult men who maybe come into survivorship later in life seeking treatment. We know that a lot of the providers in mental health and social services are women. I teach social work on the college level, and I'll tell you, most of the time I have one or two male identified folks in my class. And we also sometimes as women haven't made it a friendly space for men to be involved. And that's not helpful. That's gatekeeping. To use feminism in that way is just continuing to perpetuate all the things that keep folks from not seeking help.
Thank you for that overview. I think it is really important to think about how we as a community contribute to this and what we can do to shift that. In the film, there were a lot of instances or a lot of individuals who said they took a long time to disclose their trafficking and exploitation. And Nathan, I wonder if you can speak more to that. Do you find that in general it takes longer for boys to disclose than girls? And what are some reasons that that is?
Sure, I definitely agree with that. And it was, we heard that in the film that it can take on average 20 years for a male to disclose sexual harm in general. I think it definitely pertains to sex trafficking. And I think, there are several reasons. By and large, we're not looking, right? So we're not looking, we're not asking the questions of males who have been trafficked. In addition to that, on the survivor side, there's just with males in particular, there's such shame and stigma attached to any type of victimization, but in particular sexual harm. We know one of the things with, males, sex trafficking or male survivors of sexual harm, there's this inner conflict. Well, am I gay, or did this make me gay, or am I less of a man because of this? And those are really strong inner conflict that especially a young person has to deal with. We have to remember too, we talked about the street family or those that are in, working in communities of violence. The perception for a male, the perception that I'm weak can literally mean death on the street, or a beat down, or a robbery. And that's a really strong barrier to disclosure. The reality in America is that thousands of kids commit suicide because they think they're gay, or they think others will think they're gay. So that, in addition, is just compounds or reinforces the barriers to disclosure. And then finally, for those that I think, and Anna kind of alluded to this, the lack of representation in outreach messaging and whatever that might look like. Most or many youth survivors do not see themselves as victims. We know that. In particular, though, with male survivors, the lack of representation in those outreach messaging, I think, creates an even stronger barrier for males in particular.
Thank you for that. And I do want to draw attention again for folks who are viewing that there's a lot of stats and resources that are being placed in the comments. So please do take a look there for additional information. And I want to come back to you, Mark, because earlier, Nathan was speaking about how often there may be ties to family when we're talking about exploitation. And in the film, you speak a lot about the role your family played with regards to your exploitation, as well as close friends or peers we see often play a role for some individuals. What challenges do you think this poses in terms of identifications or even disclosures?
Well, basically, the biggest issue and problem is that family doesn't believe. You're the child, we're the adult. Whatever we say for you to do is what you want to do. So they don't believe. The struggle with that, and I'm actually struggling tonight, so I apologize. So, but family tends to stick with family per se. However, as a child, and you're telling on an adult in that particular family or that's been around with that family, I feel that the family tends to believe the adult more than they believe their own child, simply because when they're dealing with a child, the saying is a child stays in a child's place. And when a child stays in a child's place, it's difficult because that's what we're told. That's what we're told to do. We're told to go to our rooms. We're told not to. We're saying now, see something, say something. But then back in that time, if you see something, you don't say something. And when you build a relationship with a friend of the family, you know him as uncle, such as my case, and that person has built a trust with your family, it's hard to get that information out to them, to tell them, hey, this is what this person is doing to me. How can I get you to believe me? And because you don't know anything about sex, you don't know anything about being touched, you don't know anything about oral sex or anything of that magnitude, it's very difficult for your families and or close family members and or cousins, aunts, and or grandparents to believe you. Even church members, you grow up in the church, you consider your church as your family, and you try to go to other places and tell them what's going on. It always goes back to your family. Hey, did you know your son has said this? Did you know your daughter has said this? And it always goes back because they don't believe a child until that particular child acts out, that particular child rebels, that particular child runs, that particular child has issues with schooling and different things like that. Then sometimes families and our parents start to believe what's going on, because if you're that type of person that never has acted out, never has ran, never has cussed somebody out or been disrespectful, and then now all of a sudden you are, then that opens the door, say, okay, something is happening. What do we do? How do we fix it? It doesn't happen overnight. However, building that relationship with your family and your parents and having that sit down conversation. In my home, we have what's called circle of support. So we talk. We have a circle of support every other week, and we talk about things, what's going on, what's happening. And if families would do that, I think the familiar piece will be broken. However, because of the stigma, the parents have to work single family homes have to work 2 and 3 jobs. Dad is there in and out of jail. Mom may be prostituting or may be on drugs, things like that. Those things don't happen. So I think if we build that area around circle support in the home to have those conversations and build the relationships, the familiar piece will kind of have a breakdown to it. However, it's not happening, and that's another piece, like Anna alluded to. And the wording is getting out. There's information that's coming out, but we need to keep the voice going. Nathan alluded to it as well. We need to keep the voice going because working with families as a support, maybe we need to have a counseling session with families, just an open door conversation to see what would happen. So if that conversation does come up or that piece comes up, a family understand what's going on.
Thank you for that circle of support. That's a really great plan for families. I wonder, Miriam, in your experience, what are you seeing with families, or do you have additional thoughts to what Mark was speaking about?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to families that I was thinking about as both Mark and Nathan were talking. The first is if the family is not involved in the abuse, the exploitation, the response of the family when the child attempts to disclose is really key. And we know that the number one predictor of well-being in the long run is the response of non-offending family members, whether the child, the youth is supported and believed when they do disclose. And we know from young people that they often feel that they have to try multiple times before they are listened to and they are heard. So I think there's that aspect that Mark was just talking about. But I also want to pick up on a thread that Nathan brought up a bit earlier, that there are incidents and cases of trafficking where the family member is involved in the exploitation, or somebody who's close to the family is involved in the trafficking. And I think regardless of how a young person experiences sexual abuse or sexual assault or trafficking, one of the key things that we need to understand as part of their experience is, what are the barriers to telling? What are the barriers to coming forward to their family? What are the barriers to disclosing how they got involved in the life? And this is even more complex when the exploiter or the trafficker or the abuser is a family member. And I think one of the things to really understand about that complexity is that for a child to come forward and talk about a family member as an abuser or an exploiter, there's the conflict, the deep conflict about coming forward and acknowledging that somebody who is supposed to have your best interest in mind, somebody who is supposed to care for you, doesn't, and doesn't put you first, is just a fundamental conflict for young people. And it is such an enormous barrier, that dissonance between what is supposed to be and what is. And so again, one of the primary things, as for myself as an interviewer, that we really want to understand is, what are the barriers? What keeps someone from telling? What keeps someone from coming forward? And then to really understand what changed, what has helped them to come forward, and to be able to build upon that as part of the healing.
Really appreciate that insight. And I wonder, coming back to you, Anna, during the film, there was really, a lot of instances where I was really wondering, as a filmmaker, how do you ensure that, you're not further traumatizing the individuals you're speaking to? Is there trauma-informed filmmaking? What does that look like?
So I'm a social worker first and always have been. And so when I I didn't really consider myself a filmmaker until folks started calling me that at these things. Like, so, in the process of making the film, like my priority was that, okay, we need to really make sure that the folks that are in the film, are really getting autonomy over what they're saying, over what is actually put into the world, that the interviewing is done in a way where they have the ability to start and stop, that there was a relationship coming into the interview, that we weren't just going in cold turkey, that we knew each other, and many of the folks in the film still in touch with today. And so we tried to create a space as much as possible where there was a lot of conversation beforehand about what will the interview look like? Who are the people that are going to be there? What are things that you want to say? What are things you don't want to say? What are questions that are, offhand? And so try to create a structure that could be as trauma informed as possible. And I think we did a pretty good job. There are some things I would definitely do different if I was to do this again, and just learning more about how to be better at this. But what's interesting with filmmaking, and if there's anyone in the space who's done any filmmaking, and there's not a ton of ethics behind it, which is so odd to me to think about, where if I was to go and do research on this same topic, there would be an IRB process and a whole review board that gets to say if I get to do it. And so I think it's something to be said that if we are going to be making films about this, it needs to be done in a way that's honoring and equitable. One thing we did do, and I would definitely do again, is we let the film be seen by everyone who was in it, and the survivors. And if there was something they weren't comfortable with, we took it out. They had complete autonomy over that editing process. And then we gave it to them to screen on their own terms. They have the rights. They can screen it, speak, use it however they want to, because it's just as much their film as it is ours.
Maybe there should be a research study on what trauma-informed filmmaking is. It would be great to see recommendations in the industry based on what you've done. I think that would be great. I want to move forward and really talk about how our systems are responding. So coming back to Nathan, what systems are boys who are at risk and male survivors engaging with? For those agencies and systems, what are the red flags that they can be looking for to identify trafficking and exploitation?
Sure. So virtually, multi-system. So the educational system, behavioral health and healthcare, criminal justice, and child welfare, I think would be the main ones. And within those systems, we know that male survivors do report, depression and or anxiety, symptoms of complex PTSD. Seething anger and substance dependency are the physical signs that I've noticed working with the survivors that I have. And then they experience some of the same, vulnerabilities as anyone else: unstable housing, the lack of access to jobs or job training. If there's such a strong nexus between substance dependency and exploitation in general, but in particular from my experience with male survivors. And I think that has a lot to do with, the inability to kind of vocalize trauma or expressions. And so many times boys will just keep stuffing that in. And that manifests, unfortunately, through these high rates of substance dependency, acting out, the seething anger. And some of the research that I have seen, though, their HIV and STI transmission is some of the indicators that we've seen. Criminal charges for sex work, for burglary, or other drug-related offenses are some of the the red flags. I think we have to be careful, looking at indicators or a sheet of indicators, and we really have to pivot to this landscape view. What's the backstory? What's the community context? What was the family, what's that backstory, and really take everything into account. And I think if we're not doing that, just looking for some of the red flags, we tend to stigmatize some of the youth that might be engaging in survival sex or other, using or misusing drugs. But there are screening tools that I think can help, or that have been proven to help. There in California, you have the See It tool that was designed there. One of my favorites, or that I advocate for, is the Quick Youth Indicator tool. So the QUIT tool, developed by Covenant House, New Jersey. What I like about it, it was a gender and it was designed and tested with male, trans, and females. It's a pre-screen designed for non-clinicians. It's 4 questions, non-invasive, and it starts a conversation. There's also, if we're going upstream, screening for ACEs. We know this. There's such a strong correlation between adverse child experiences and then later exploitation. I think if we increased access to the ACEs screening as well as ESPERT, so screening for substance dependency, and some of these systems that males are engaging with, we have an opportunity to at least early intervene, prevent, but also at that secondary prevention level. So I think the last point on this is we can have a gender or an evidence-based screening tool. It could be gender responsive. We have to remember too, who's doing the screening. And so I've seen more or effective results when you have a gender responsive screening or assessment tool and a protocol that's coupled with debiasing training as well as more in-depth training on male victimization.
Thank you. And it looks like we only have a couple minutes left, but I did want to hear really, Mark, about your organization and what the Buddy House is doing now to help young men.
Well, the Buddy House, we are what we're going to be doing. We are going to be a one-stop shop respite to where if there's 7 tiers to it. If a GBI police officer or agency contact us with a survivor, we would allow them to come in and just rest 3 to 5 days, rest, eat, sleep, whatever they need to do. Within that 3 to 5 days, we'll implement tier 2, which is case management services. And that case management services will be what services does that child need. From tier 2, they may go from 3 and or 4, depending on where they are. But tier 3 would be the medical piece of it, which is the medical, dental, vision, psychological, drug and alcohol treatment if needed. And then tier 4 will be moving into the life skills and the educational component. Tier 5 would be going into the job readiness skills, how to do resumes, how to interview, dress for success, and things like that. And then tier 6. Tier 6 will be moving into what's called transition homes, where they would have roommate style apartments. All this will be in one location, so it'd be like an old hotel or something like that. That's our goal. And then roommate style housing, and then tier 8 will be moving on with 18 to 24 month case management follow-up. What we're currently doing now is that we're working with agencies such as our technical colleges here, such as our main hospital here, putting MOUs in place. So when we get those calls and we get someone here in Georgia that we can support and help with services, we would provide those services with MOUs, by putting them in contact with other agencies as well. From there, we are planning to do the first male conference that talks about domestic violence, sex trafficking, and or CSEC here in Georgia in 2023. And we are looking to hopefully have our own home or our own facility in 2023 as well. So that's the Buddy House.
That's a lot. That's pretty incredible. I know, Nathan, you're also provide a lot of technical and training assistance throughout the U.S. Do you want to just give a quick plug on that?
Yeah, briefly. I draw on the experience from leading or operationalizing the program here in South Florida, which was a survivor housing program for young adult male survivors presenting with substance dependency. And I've drawn that experience to provide training and technical assistance, program development, marketing communications, research review, really any efforts or any kind of strategic planning that will help organizations enhance their efforts to respond to the trafficking of boys and men.
Thank you so much. I want to give Anna the last word, but I also just want to, again, for the audience, if you can make sure you look through the different resources, see what you can take away today to take the next step in learning more about, identifying and connecting young men to services and adults. But I want to give Anna the last word of what you want folks as their takeaway for today from the film.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone who decided to spend your night listening to the panel, engaging with us, and viewing the film. My hope is that what you'll take away is that this is a conversation starter. This is just a small amount of time that you dedicated to learn about this, and that this will spark your own creativity, your own compassion, your own ability to engage knowledge, and learn more about it. Learn more about what's going on in your community. What are the services taking place? Being curious around even your children, your partners, the school your kids are at. How can you make this space be more equitable for folks who want to come forward and get services coming out of sexual violence, and particularly sex trafficking? So I hope it starts something for you. I hope it continues to build, and I hope you take care of yourself after watching this film and listening to the panel. Thank you so much for joining us.
And a big thank you to everybody here. Thank you, Anna, for this incredible documentary, and to all the participants for sharing so much. I'm sure there have been comments coming through, thanking all the panelists as well, and those who've been involved in the film. With that, thanking the audience for joining us. I hope you take away something today. Tony is back. Thank you, Tony, for creating this platform, fancy platform.
You got it. You got it. This was great. Thank you so much to all of you for your time and the great engagement. And I'll just say, finally, if you're watching this live, it's going to self-destruct after this. So these links will all go away, but we will take the panel discussion part and we will put that up separately, because we don't have the rights to just put the film and the whole video that was happening tonight. So you can go to boysdoc.com to view it later. Is that right? boysdoc.com for a fee. And that goes to help these filmmakers and these survivors keep telling their story. And in regards to Bravemaker, what we do, I just really want to encourage you to go. If you're watching this on our YouTube page or the BAATC Facebook page, go to our website at bravemaker.com, because we have a ton of film screenings just like this happening every week. We're doing a film festival in Redwood City, California, July 7th through the 10th, where we'll be talking about human trafficking again during those 4 days in Redwood City, California, as well as mental health, racial justice, gender equity, disability representation, LGBTQ rights, all through the power of film and discussion. So this is what we are all about. We love doing this. We are a nonprofit dedicated to brave stories for justice, diversity, and inclusion. So thank you so much for joining us. You can find me on the socials at Tony Gapason. I'm a filmmaker, and I love to help people tell their stories. If I can help you do that, I would love it. And thanks to Pamela Estes and the San Mateo Human Trafficking County Coordination Program that put this whole thing together these past 3 months. This is our third and final one. So wonderful time doing this with y'all. Thank you to Sharon and Nathan and Anna and Miriam and Mark. Really great to do this. And I wish you all peace as you have a great weekend and Passover and Easter or whatever you celebrate. All right. Take care and peace to everybody.